Hey, welcome back. I'm Aubrey, and I will be reading you some more Borgel. I hope you're excited. This is Borgel by Daniel Pinkwater, starting with Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Back in the old country, when I was a boy, we used to sit around eating potatoes and telling stories about how mean our parents were. Sometimes we didn't have a bottle of Chef Chow's hot and spicy oil to pour on the potatoes, and sometimes we did. That's how it was in my childhood. Not like today. Not like some places. My family was so poor and my parents were so mean that when I wanted to have a pet, they gave me a peach pit. You getting this, Melvin? I wanted a little doggy or a kitty, and they gave me a peach pit. And I loved that peach pit. I named it Lance. I taught it tricks and everything, but it was no use. We were too poor. Finally, my mother and father took Lance away and sold him to a rich family as a pet for their children. Can you imagine how horrible I would feel when I walked past the rich people's house and saw those children playing with Lance, who had once been my peach pit? Now, when I say these were rich people, I mean they had water. They had mud outside their house. We only had stones. And they only hit their children on the head instead of lunch. We got hit on the head instead of 3 meals a day. Nobody was doing all that well in the old country. The finest thing any boy could hope to be was a time tourist. This was because a time tourist was permitted to leave the old country. In fact, everybody would help the time tourist and give him things, you see. We wanted people to leave because that meant more room for everybody who stayed. Usually only the children of extremely wealthy families that had luxuries like clothing could get to be time tourists. It was too much to hope for. All a boy like me could hope for was that maybe his father would knock a couple of his teeth out. But my father was too poor even for that. So what hope was there that I would become a time tourist? Still, I had my crazy dream that somehow I would get to be a time tourist. When I was 11 years old, my father performed the ritual of throwing me out of the house and shaking his fist at me. This meant that it was time for me to begin my life's work, which in my family meant searching the fields for skunks that had been squashed under the hooves of the rich people's cattle. It was satisfying work, and after a year I found a skunk. This meant I could get married. But I didn't do that. Instead of trading the skunk's pelt for a bottle of Chef Chow's hot and spicy oil and going out looking for a wife, I went to the great city. I traded the skunk skin for some Kleenexes, and I traded those for a pickle. It was the first pickle I had ever seen. I traded the pickle, and I traded what I got for the pickle, and I traded again, and I traded again. Every trade was a good one, and before long, I was a prosperous man. By the time I was 19, I had a place to sleep indoors. When I was 25, I owned my own hat. Most people who had a hat had to share it with 5 or 6 other people. I had a hat strictly for my own use. I was going places, but I was still far from my goal of becoming a time tourist. You're making this up, right? I asked Uncle Borgel. Every word. Why? You don't like it? It's fine. I just wanted to ask you about that thing over there. What thing? You mean the big pulsating thing that looks like it's made out of light? That's it. Is that anything we should worry about? Only if it comes near us, Borgel said. That's some kind of monster made out of energy. It might want to consume us. Consume? Swallow us up. If it's one of those energy monsters, it eats everything it comes near, planets even. The thing, the energy monster, appeared to be as big as the sun. It was glowing a sort of peach color, tinged with green. It scared the dickens out of me. Uncle Borgel, I think it's coming closer. Is there any chance it doesn't see us? Almost none, Borgel said. It senses our electrical field. If we don't get away from it, we're in a lot of trouble. How do we get away from it? Easy. We shift gears and go fast. This may feel strange. Just relax. Borgel moved the gear selector level. A red light began flashing on the dashboard. There was a high-pitched whine, and the doorbell began to vibrate, and then shake violently. Now I just give it the gas, Borgel said. I felt a sensation in every part of my body. It was like being pricked with pins everywhere. The Dorbzelge and the space around it began to glow with a white light. Fafnir was whining uncomfortably in the back seat. I thought that the energy monster had caught up with us. Then, suddenly, we were enveloped in complete blackness. I can't see anything, I said. Guess how fast we're going, Borgel asked. Too fast? 372,000 miles per second. That's twice the speed of light, sonny boy. I hate to go this fast. It's got to be bad for the tires. What's more, you never know where you'll end up. You car sick? I feel weird. Do you think you've gotten away from that energy monster thing? Probably. It's centuries away by now. Nothing to worry about. So maybe we could slow down? We're slowing down. You just don't step on the brakes after going double the speed of light. The blackness had reduced to the sort of darkness I was used to. I still couldn't see anything, but I didn't feel as if we were inside a bottle of ink. Then, gradually, I became conscious of little points of light. The points of light became brighter, more defined, and I was able to perceive some of them as nearer than others. This looked like space as shown on TV. Where are we? I asked. I have no idea, Borgel said. I'm looking for a place to pull off the road. Road? What road? We're in outer space, I shouted. What road? The interstate, naturally. We've been on it all along. If I squinted my eyes, I could imagine that there was a sort of roadway looking like diamond dust, or the Milky Way. Look, I said to Borgel, I don't want to hear a story. I want you to answer my questions one by one. Is that okay? Sure thing, Borgel said. But first, let's pull off. I want a cold drink, and by this time the dog needs to stretch his legs. Pull off? Where? Right here, Borgel said. He spun the wheel and the Dorbzelge lurched to the right. A cold root beer in a frosty mug sound good to you? He asked. It sounds fine, I said. I could see a large orange rectangle glowing in the blackness. There was some sort of writing on it, but the characters were like nothing I had ever seen, just a series of black and yellow squares. Chapter 5. So, get out, Borgel said. I opened the door and started to put my foot out. Wait a minute, there's no ground, I said. Beneath my sneaker there was nothing but velvety blackness, infinity. You can walk on that, Borgel said. No, I can't, I said. There's nothing there. Borgel was chuckling. Look, I'll get out and walk around to your side. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's as solid as concrete. Borgel walked around the car and stood by my open door. Now just put a foot out and feel. I felt. There was something solid under my foot. I still hesitated. How do I tell the difference between whatever this is and a big hole in space? I asked. It's a knack, Borgel said. After you've traveled in time, space, and the other for a little while, you'll just know when something is all right to stand on and when it isn't. You'll develop an instinct. Well, what if I don't? You will. Maybe I can't. Possible. You develop instincts in order to survive. That's what they're for. Come over here. Haltingly, I took a step away from the Dorbzelge. Come right over here, Borgel said. He was standing by a long yellow object that ran along what would have been the ground, if there had been any. It appeared solid from a distance, but looked more like a beam of light when I got close to it. It resembled one of those concrete barriers in parking lots. Now, if you should step over this thing, then you'd be in trouble. Why? Because there's nothing on the other side. Nothing to stand on? You would just float away. Cripes, it looks exactly the same as this side. Looks the same, but it's not the same. You have to sense which is which. Besides, they've got these markers all around. What we were in was a parking lot. At the far end, under the glowing orange rectangle, was a structure made of some kind of shiny metallic stuff. A space-time root beer stand. Let the dog out, Borgel said. He needs to run around. He'll fall over the edge. Dogs develop instincts faster than humans. Don't worry so much. You'll turn into an old man. I opened the rear door. Fafnir was asleep on the back seat. I called to him. He bounded out of the car, gave a horrible shriek when he saw there was nothing but emptiness beneath him, and tried to turn in midair and scramble back inside. He hit the nom ground and sprawled there. He lay still for a while, sniffing frantically. Then, gingerly, he got to his feet and gave me a look of contempt. "You blince," Fafner said. "You could have warned me?" "The dog talked," I said numbly. "Isn't this fun?" Borgel chortled. "They do that when you take them out in time and space. Some surprise, huh?" I was feeling sick. Too much was going on. I was nauseated. "I have to pee," the dog said. He wandered over to the barrier and lifted a leg. "See," Borgel said, "how quickly they develop instincts." "I love you," Fafner said to Borgel and licked his hand. "Jerk," he said to me. "Peewee, dope, stupid kid." In the midst of all this confusion, I was suddenly confirmed in my lifelong suspicion that the family dog, Fafner, didn't like me. "Now, how about some root beer?" Borgel asked. "None for me, master, just some water, but you go ahead." I meant for Melvin," Borgel said. "Oh," Fafner said. We walked over to the root beer stand, except where there was something, such as the stand itself, the Dorbzelge, ourselves. There was nothing. The blackness above us was identical to the blackness below us. There appeared to be no source of light, but we and the things around us were plainly visible. This had the effect of making everything seem to glow with its own inner light. The interior of the root beer stand was illuminated, and behind the counter was a single most disgusting thing I had ever seen or imagined. It was a formless pink mass with occasional tufts of coarse black hair, slimy patches, no eyes that I could see, and lots of red bumps and pimples. "The proprietor is an anthropoid bloboform," Borgel said. "They're very industrious and clean. Don't let appearances fool you." An ugly hole opened in the repulsive mass, and an appropriately unpleasant voice came out, bubbling and rasping. "My name is Alfred. I will be your waiter for tonight," said the bloboform. "What may I serve you?" "2 root beers in frosted mugs," Borgel said, "and a cup of water for the dog. No ice," Fafner said. "That will be 120 zlotys," said Alfred. "Zlotys?" I asked. "Common currency throughout the universe," Borgel said. "I have some." "Any fries with that?" Alfred asked. "He means French fried meteorites," Borgel explained. "A little heavy for humanoids. No thank you, Alfred. Just the drinks." "It is my pleasure to serve you," the bloboform pseudo handed us our drinks, and we carried them to a wooden picnic table near the stand. "I need this," I said. I took a swallow of my root beer. It was the best I had ever tasted. It was the first familiar thing I had encountered in this last hour or so, and it had the effect of calming me down. "Now look, Uncle Borgel," I said, wiping the foam off my upper lip. "Don't you think it's time you explained a few things to me?" "Sure. What's to explain?" "Let's start with everything," I said. "All righty," Borgel said. "Here goes. I already explained to you about time, right?" "Map of New Jersey," I said. "Correct. And space also?" "Like a bagel." "Bingo. So now you want to know how it all works, and how we travel from time and place to time and place, and what all this is, am I right?" "You are." "Okie dokie. Now, you ever travel in a car back on Earth and in your own time?" "Of course." "How does the car work?" "It's got an engine." "Yes. And how does the engine work?" "Well, you put gas in and turn on the ignition, and I guess the gas burns up or explodes, and the energy, it gets to the wheels somehow, and, Good for you. You know more about how cars work than I do. Me, I just turn the key, make sure the thing has gas, oil, and water poured into the appropriate holes, air in the tires, and I go. I don't know, or care to know, one thing about how the engine runs. When it breaks, I take it to a mechanic. See? You don't know how a car works?" "No, I don't. Next, when you take a trip, ever been on a car trip?" "Sure. And when you go on a car trip, you do what to make sure you'll get where you're going?" "Well, you might look at a map, or you could just get on the road and watch for signs along the road." "My God, you don't know any more about how any of this works than an ordinary tourist," shouted Borgel. That's it, sonny boy. Oh, from experience, I know a little about the people, sites, places, and customs. But as to theories, who cares? We're out to have a good time. Aren't you having a good time? I'm having a good time, master, Fafnir said. Good dog, Borgel said, patting his head. Hey, said Alfredo, the anthropoid bloboform. You left your lights on. Borgel got up and walked toward the Dorbzelge. When he was about 10 steps from the car, he was enveloped in a ball of orange light. Then he was gone. It couldn't have taken a whole second. Chapter 6. What happened, Uncle Borgel? Where are you? I shouted. Oh no, the bloboform said. Not again. Master, where are you? Fafnir said. He was running in circles, sniffing the blackness. What happened? Where did Borgel go? I asked Alfred. This is getting to be too much, the bloboform said. Nobody will come here anymore because of those darned kids and their billbox. What are you talking about? What kids? What's billbox? And what happened to my uncle? A billbox is a gleep, a gag, a practical joke, something that makes you go, gleep. Used to be you could buy billbox in joke shops on Saturn IV in the 5th Age. Now they're prohibited, but those damn kids make their own and work gleeps on people. I've got nothing against having fun, but maybe 50 customers of mine have been billboxed in the past couple of months. That sort of thing gets around. It could put you out of business. I don't understand a thing you're saying. I want to know what happened to Uncle Borgel. Look, these kids come from rich families. They have their own time-space vehicles. They wander around playing the gleeps and getting into trouble. They see your old uncle standing there and they put a billbox on him. That is, they subject him to an unstable, trans-dimensional shifter. They move him, but no one can say where. He might be 5 minutes in the future, and all of a sudden, we'll catch up with him, and he'll just be standing where he was. Or he might be shifted 6,000 years, and 50 billion light years, and maybe kicked onto another existential plane to boot. It's like tying someone to a rocket and just casually shooting the thing off. Now, don't cry, kid. You want a free root beer? I'm starting to realize that I'll never go crazy, no matter what, I said, because if I haven't lost my mind by now, it's never going to happen. Are you telling me that some kids passing by in some kind of spaceship, a time spaceship, Alfred said, they were probably here for a long time, but in our time continuum, it was so quick that we never saw them. Okay, a time spaceship. Some kids just came along and zapped Borgel with some kind of gleep, and now he's gone, but not dead. Depends on where he landed, but not necessarily. And, as I said, he might be nearby. The commercial billbox they used to sell would just send you a few hours and maybe a light hour at most, usually. Maybe all your uncle has to do is call a taxi, spend a few zlotys, and he'll be back here in a jiffy. Maybe a solar month. On the other hand, I said. On the other hand, he might be gone for good. That's why those billbox were outlawed. After a few years of humor starts to wear off. I looked at the bloboform. He was talking to me in a friendly enough manner. He was the closest thing to a friend I had at the moment. This did nothing to diminish his hideousness. It was, in fact, a sort of steadying element in conversing with him. I had to concentrate so hard on not throwing up that I escaped going into a panic. You say others have been, billboxed here? Many. And how many of them came back? 2. That's 2 out of roughly 50 or 4%. Your uncle stands a very good chance, considering that the chance of survival at all in this part of time-space is only about 10%. It was comforting to hear Alfred talk in this matter-of-fact way. Even though it was nauseating in the extreme to watch him do so, I believe he was moved by my situation, and this caused him to quiver more than was strictly necessary and exude quantities of slime. Look, I'll make you a root beer float with double ice cream, and you can sleep in that old Dorbzelge while you wait for your uncle. And I'll give you free eats. He can pay me when he comes, and you can use my private bathroom, too. This, when it came to the fact, was even more horrible than my imaginings at the moment, which were enough to bring on shudders. I went to talk it over with Fafner. The bloboform says we can stay here. I heard, doofus. Dogs hear 16 times better than humanoids, and if you spread out my olfactory membrane, it would be as large as my whole skin. I'd like to do that, I muttered. I heard that too, Fafner growled. Now that you've gotten my master lost or killed or whatever, are you going to take care of me or not? You little crud, I shouted. How would you like me to kick your useless rump over that barrier and let you float around thinking over what a stupid, foul-smelling, ugly, offensive little cur you are? Sorry, master, Fafner said. He gave my hand a dab with his tongue. Don't do that. Sorry. You going to feed me? I'll talk to the bloboform. I love you, master. Look, you hairy little cretin, I snarled. I know you dislike me. Now I'm going to make sure you have food, no matter how you speak to me. So stop with the hypocrisy. You mean it? The dog asked. You'll feed me? Yes. No matter that I think you're a jerk? That's right. I'm kind to dumb animals. Now shut up. I want to think. Huh. Of course, I may not feed you very often. I'll be quiet. Alfred came out from behind the counter. I wish he hadn't done that. Looking at Alfred while he was more or less stationary was nasty enough. Watching him in motion was enough to make a dog gag, of which I had evidence. Here, he said, offering me a root beer float. I wiped the slime off the mug. I'm kind of surprised that you speak English. Oh, you have to know languages in this business, Alfred said. I get a lot of New York people coming through here. As I sipped my root beer float, I was seized with an agonizing feeling of aloneness. I moaned into the mug. Where can Uncle Borgel be? Chapter 7. Borgel tumbled through blackness. He was unable to see, hear, or feel. He was not aware of having a heartbeat or breathing. He might have thought he was dead, except that the odds were against that, it never having happened before. What is this, a gleep? He said. Then there was a light, a dim, unpleasant sort of light. Borgel found himself in a rocky and barren landscape. The soil was black, volcanic. It was cold. There was a few blades of grass. Borgel had landed in an uncomfortable position. It was as though he were in the middle of a somersault. His shoulders flat, his body bent double, his feet over his head, his toes on the ground. He looked up at the gray, cloudy sky between his legs. He said, figuring it out. Hoopla! He completed the somersault and bounced to his feet. Not bad, he said. Not many old guys over 100 could do that. Then he looked around. The dismal place was familiar. He had been there before. I've been here before, he said. Borgel was pretty sure he knew where he was, but he held out hope that he had landed in Iceland or some remote part of Greenland or Patagonia. There was always a chance he wasn't where he thought he was, but he was. A fair-sized rock whizzled past his head. Borgel saw a gnarled and shabby figure standing on a little rise of ground. An old man. He was looking around for another rock. Yep, I know where I am, Borgel thought. Get out of here, the old man shouted. Daddy? Is that you? It's me, Borgel, Borgel shouted. I know that, the old man shouted, hurling another rock. The old country, Borgel said, dodging. Chapter 8. Alfred must have been exaggerating about 50 of his customers having been billbocked in the past couple of months. Either that, or he calculated months differently, because he hardly had any customers at all. Days, or what seemed like days, might go by with nobody stopping at the root beer stand. It's a lousy location, Alfred said. Meanwhile, Fafner and I slept under Borgel's Dorbel's edge and waited. Fafner was impossible. He complained all the time. We'd gone through the fig bars, and there was nothing Alfred sold that humans or dogs could eat except root beer floats. I was plenty sick of root beer floats, but Fafner was getting wild. It was starting to look as though he would eat me, or I would eat him. Alfred turned out to be a nice enough guy. He spent his time puttering around the root beer stand. Sometimes he'd let me help him, but really there wasn't much to do. I tried to get Alfred to tell me something about where I was, but he appeared to be almost completely ignorant. He was interested in nothing but running his root beer stand and talked about nothing but how bad business was. He didn't even remember where he came from. All he knew about was the root beer stand. It had been easier to get information from Uncle Borgel. I really missed him. "Can't we call the cops or something?" I asked Alfred. "Sure, we could call them. 2 or 3 centuries and they might even turn up. And then what? Where would they look for your uncle? We're talking about infinite distances. I don't think you have any idea of what a lousy location this is." We did ask the few customers who showed up if they'd seen Uncle Borgel. None of them had the slightest idea of what we were talking about. Incidentally, I got to see some pretty unusual life forms at the root beer stand. We had some bean people from Flamingus, clown men from Naufo, and once a busload of Freudians. It was interesting to see the different ways the various beings drank their root beer. After a while, I was depressed. I spent a lot of time hanging around the Dorbzelge. Fafner spent practically all his time curled up on the back seat, complaining. Even though he was obnoxious, I felt more comfortable with him than with Alfred. He was closer to human. Sometimes we'd fool around with the radio, hoping to get some idea of where we were or what sort of place it was. I still hadn't figured out even that much. We had no luck with the radio. When we could get a station, it was always in some language other than human. We got sick of listening to the gurgling, squeaking, and mumbling. Except for Michael Jackson records, they didn't play anything we could understand. One day, I was rummaging around in the glove compartment of at Fafner's insistence. "Look," I told him, "we've been through and through. There is nothing to eat in here." "Look anyway," Fafner said. "Maybe there are some fig bar crumbs. I'll let you lick the crumbs out of the corners twice already." "Look anyway. If I don't get something to eat soon, I'm going to die." "You get root beer floats," I said. "I'm sick of root beer floats. I hate root beer floats. I'm a dog. Dogs don't drink root beer." "There's ice cream in them," I said. "Are you kidding?" Fafner screamed. "Licorice flavored ice cream? Black ice cream? You think that's a treat or something? I'm your responsibility. You have to get me some real food." "What do you suggest?" "We could eat the bloboform," Fafner said craftily. "Get real," I said. "Okay, how about we eat the tires?" We had been through this 100 times. Fafner was going to list every single thing in our environment from the root beer stand to my shoe and suggest we eat it. His other topic was the trunk. It was locked, and we didn't have the key. We had tried to pry it open with Alfred's ice cream scoop, but the Dorbzelge was built like a vault. "We could eat the upholstery," Fafner said. "Shut up," I said. I had found something, stuck to the back of the card, advertising Sadie's drive-through fish market in Columbus, Ohio. Was a key. It was stuck to it with what looked like a part of melted cough drop. "Looky," I said, peeling the key off the card. "Is that a cough drop?" "Gimme," Fafner said. "No, idiot. Look, it's a key." "We could eat this key?" Fafner said. He was still going through his endless list of uneatable things we might try to eat. "It might be the key to the trunk," I said. "And there might be food in the trunk." Fafner was bouncing off the roof. We raced around to the back of the car. It was the key to the trunk. I fitted it into the little slot and turned it. The lock clicked. I raised the lid. "There's food in there! There's food in there!" Fafner screamed. He was bounding around in circles. I peered into the trunk. Fafner was standing with his front paws on the rear bumper. The trunk was full of all sorts of junk, including a 25-pound bag of Kibblebits. Kibblebits dog food. "Is that?" Fafner asked, drooling. "It sure is," I said. "That's dog food," Fafner snarled. "It's mine. You can't have any. It's just for dogs. Mine." I slammed the trunk lid and put the key in my pocket. Fafner's mouth snapped shut, drool dripping from the corners. I think I'll go over and see what Alfred's doing, I said. Of course, I'd be happy to share my dog food with you, Master, Fafner whined. That's better, I said. Get your bowl. Right away, Master, Fafner said. I would like to say, right here, that Kibblebit's dog food is tasty and nutritious. It is well balanced and easy to digest. I would recommend it to anyone. It is very good with root beer. I found something else in the trunk. It was the owner's manual for the Dorbzelge. Chapter 9. Borgel stretched out on the flattened cardboard box, the place of honor in his father's house. Must have been a billbock, he said aloud to himself. I suppose Melvin is still back at the root beer stand. Well, he's a capable boy. Besides, the dog will take care of him. Old Blivnik, Borgel's father, spoke. Borgel? Yes, Daddy. Shut up! Same old dad, Borgel thought. I have to get out of here. Chapter 10. I had a pretty good idea how to drive an ordinary car. I'd spent a lot of time behind the wheel of those miniature gas-powered racers at River Edge Amusement Park at home. Reading the Dorbzelge owner's manual, I couldn't see that driving it would be much different. My plan was to get Fafner and myself away from Alfred's time-space root beer stand and maybe try to get home. Anything was better than waiting around there. And the truth was, I didn't think Uncle Borgel was coming back. Or he might come back in 15 or 20 years. I thought we ought to go while the bag of kibble bits was still pretty full. Fuel was no problem either. I read in the manual that when the Dorbzelge operated in time, space, and the other, it ran on hydromatic drive, which was inexhaustible. The manual gave a few clues about the rules of time, space, and the other travel. In many ways, it was easier than operating a car at home on Earth in the 20th century. It appeared that staying on the interstate was something the Dorbzelge would automatically do. There wasn't any need to steer most of the time, and you couldn't get lost. That is, you couldn't get any more lost than we already were. I would stay on the road, or the path, or the beam, or whatever it was. I thought I could handle it. I talked it over with Alfred. Why do you want to leave? The Bloboform asked. Your uncle might come back any month now. Besides, I thought you weren't getting to like me. I do like you, Alfred. I just think we should go. Well, I wasn't going to tell you this, but I think you have a lot of talent for the root beer business. I thought maybe you'd stay and help me. When my time comes to transmogrify, you can have all of this. Alfred made a sweeping gesture with a pseudopod, indicating the lonely, deserted, forlorn root beer stand. I'd like nothing more, I said, but I really think we should go. Well, of course, if you think so. Alfred was really sad. I'm going to miss you. Let's shake hands. Eek. I mean, before we do that, maybe you could tell me where we should go? I'd like to get someplace where I can send a letter, or maybe make a phone call. My family probably thinks I'm dead. Well, the big city is probably your best bet. The big city? How far is that? Must be, 10 or 15 metasparasangs. Is 10 or 15 metasparasangs a long way? Compared to what? Never mind. What I want to know is, what sort of place is it? Is it dangerous or what? Well, it's the big city. You've never been there, have you? Well, no. You sure it exists? Sure. Yes. Pretty sure. Sort of. I think so. Maybe. And it's in that direction? I asked, pointing. To the best of my knowledge. That's good enough for me, I said. I started for the Dorbzelge. Good luck, Alfred shouted. He grabbed my hand for a horrible moment. I thought he was going to hug me. If your uncle shows up, I'll tell him where you went. I slipped behind the wheel of the Dorbzelge. Fafner was in the back seat, as usual, mumbling that I was going to get us both killed. You can stay here with Alfred if you like, until the kibble runs out. I'm going with you, Fafner said. I remembered I didn't have a key. I stuck my head under the dashboard. There was a hunk of wire dangling down. I touched the loose ends to various things until it made a spark. I heard the engine come to life. I bobbed up and turned to Fafner in the back seat. "I got it started," I said. "Look where you're going, maniac," Fafner shouted. "We're moving." We were headed for one of those barriers at the edge of the parking lot. On the other side was empty space. I spun the wheel and the Dorbzelge turned. According to the manual, we would have stopped automatically before going over the edge, I told Fafner. "Did it ever occur to you that this thing might not be working perfectly?" Fafner asked. "I'd watch the steering if I were you." "Good thought," I said. I maneuvered the Dorbzelge out of the parking lot and onto the interstate. It wasn't so hard to handle. As we picked up speed, I saw the root beer stand getting smaller in the rearview mirror. Alfred was waving his arm or something. We were on our way. Chapter 11. "This is luck," Borgel thought. "Only home a day, and what do I find? A skunk! Nice one, too. Hasn't been squashed more than a week. Well, I did it before, I can do it again." From a neighboring field, old Blivnik shouted, "Hey, Borgel." "Yes, Daddy." "You found a skunk?" "That's right, Daddy," Borgel shouted, waving the prize over his head. "Well, get out of here already, you bum," Blivnik bellowed. "All right, Daddy," Borgel called with a tear in his eye. "Goodbye, Daddy. Dear old Dad. You bum." Chapter 12. It was smooth sailing after a while. I had the old Dorbzelge eating out of the palm of my hand. Even Fafner admitted that I was handling the machine okay. "So what's your plan when we get to the big city?" he asked me. "Well, I haven't got a plan as such. We'll have to see when we get there." "What if we see that the people who live there are monsters of some kind and eat people? Or even worse, dogs?" "Oh, I don't think that will happen." "Why not?" "Well, because nothing dangerous has happened so far." "Your uncle got gleeped," Fafner said. "We were stuck 1,000,000 miles from no place with a bloboform. You nearly drove us over the edge in the parking lot. We're traveling through time, space, and the other, and neither of us knows what those are, really. The road is a sort of ribbon light on both sides of which is endless blackness, and if you had a flat tire or needed to sneeze at the wrong moment, we'd probably drift away and die. Between us, we've got nothing but a bag of kibble, which actually belongs to me, by the way, and I'm just sharing it with you temporarily. We're heading for some big city we were told about by a shapeless idiot who's never been there, and it isn't even sure it exists. And you say nothing dangerous has happened so far? If you ask me, we're doomed. We're as good as dead right now. We are dead, only we don't know it." "Now look," I said. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to speak to you this way, but you force me. I am a human being, whereas you are only a dog, a lower animal. I have the power of reason, and I have superior judgment. If I tell you everything is all right, it's all right. I give the orders, understand?" "You know what a schmo is?" Fafner asked. "Yes." "Well, you're one." The truth is, I wasn't all that confident. I just thought it would be better not to let Fafner get depressed. He remained quiet in the back seat, not saying a word. We'd be zooming along for a number of hours. Everything was going smoothly. I was sort of enjoying driving the Dorbzelge, and that made me feel sad. I missed Borgel. I thought how this would be fun if he were with us. Fafner was continuing to give me the silent treatment. The road had been a continuous and uninterrupted ribbon of light. All around us was blackness, with the occasional distant glow of a star or something. At times, it was hard to know whether I was asleep or awake. I wished Fafner would say something to break the monotony. Finally, he spoke. "Pick that guy up." In the distance, I could make out just a figure standing at the side of the road. "A hitchhiker? Pick him up! Pick him up!" "Listen, Fafner, it isn't a good idea to pick up hitchhikers. Didn't you know that? Pick him up! Pick him up!" Fafner was shrieking. "No kidding. It's dangerous. Especially way out here. I mean, he could be a robber or a murderer. We'd better not. Pick him up! Pick him up! It's Borgel, you idiot!" I stepped on the brakes. Uncle Borgel got into the car. Whoo boy, that was some experience. Did you guys have fun while I was gone? Chapter 13. Master, never leave me alone with this idiot again, Fafner said. Hey, no fair. I took good care of him, I said. Look who's driving. You're doing a good job, Melvin. Where were you heading? We were on our way to the big city. Perfect. That's just where I wanted to go, Borgel said. I smell a skunk, Fafner said. Chapter 14. Yup, I found a good one, Borgel said. Say, I have a good idea, I said. Let's throw the skunk out. Are you kidding? We can make a fortune with this carcass, Uncle Borgel said, pulling the flat skunk out of the paper bag he was carrying. Well, what if we put the skunk in the trunk? I asked. Maybe we could sort of wrap it in a plastic bag. Yes, let's do that before I barf, Fafner said. Can't find the key, Borgel said. As luck would have it, I found it, I said. So pull over, princess, if you're too delicate to ride with a squashed skunk in the front seat. Hey, take my bag of kibble out of there, Fafner said. I don't want it riding with that thing. Such sissies, Borgel said. When we transferred the dead skunk to the trunk, Borgel and I swapped places, and he took over the driving. It was just as well. I was pretty tired. As soon as we were moving, and most of the skunk perfume had cleared out of the Dorbzelge interior, I fell fast asleep. I woke up in broad daylight. I was stretched out on the seat with my coat over me. Uncle Borgel must have put it there. I could hear Borgel outside making a great deal of noise, singing and banging and rattling what sounded like pots and pans. It hadn't quite dawned on me that the Dorbzelge wasn't moving, and Borgel's voice was coming from the vicinity of the rear bumper. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. When I sat up, I saw trees and bushes and the smoke of a half a dozen campfires. Looking around through the windows of the Dorbzelge, I saw that we were in a strange place, as ever. It looked like a dump. There were piles of old junk, rusted car bodies, piles of old plywood, dead buses and trucks, and other things that might have been spaceships. There were stovepipes sticking out of the piles of junk, and smoke was coming out of some of them. I saw people and things like people sitting around on folding chairs and on boxes. Some of the beings were doing the wash, chopping wood, talking, cooking over campfires, and engaging in all sort of activities. It was like a town made out of garbage. It had been a long time since I was in a place with things like ground, sky, trees, and light. Later, I found out that only the interstate was like that, where you were someplace. It tended to be a place similar to Earth, more or less. I climbed out of Dorbzelge. Borgel had the trunk open and was cooking in an improvised kitchen, a folding table with a little gas stove on it, beneath a hunk of cloth attached to the open trunk lid at one end and to a mop handle poked into the ground at the other. Borgel was stirring something in a frying pan, and Fafner was nearby, sitting, watching, and drooling. I hope you're hungry, he said. I'm making something special. Cornmeal mush with Mexican peppers. It's my favorite camping out breakfast. What is this place, and where did you get the food? I asked. The cornmeal mush with Mexican peppers looked lethal, but it wasn't dog kibble. This is the famous Gypsy Bill's Resort and Spa and Hobo Camp and Junkyard, Uncle Borgel said. As to the food, I made a deal with the proprietor for a part interest in our skunk. I told you it would come in handy. I've been here before. Of course, the place isn't what it was. In my day, all sorts of really distinguished people used to stay here. Now Gypsy Bill Jr., he's the son of the founder, appears to just let anybody in. Also, he's added a duck farm since the last time I was here. Smell that? I could smell it. Uncle Borgel directed me to the wash house, which was just behind a clump of bushes, and told me to hurry back. Breakfast will be served in 5 minutes on the front fender, he said. The wash house was an old shack ready to fall down. When I got back to the Dorbzelge, Uncle Borgel had arranged breakfast on the fender and hood. In addition to his special favorite camping out breakfast, there was also some goat cheese from Gypsy Bill Jr.'s goat, reconstituted mango juice, figs, and raw peanuts. Ordinarily, I might have had some criticisms about the food, But after living on licorice root beer floats and dog food, it was heaven. I had a little of everything, and Fafner made a pig of himself. While we were eating, Gypsy Bill Jr. himself came by. He was tall and fat with a clip-on earring on one ear, and he wore 2 hats, one on top of the other. "Ah, my guests," Gypsy Bill Jr. said. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" "Everything is first-rate, Bill Jr.," Borgel said. "It does my heart good to see how you've kept the place up since the old days." "Then you were the guest of my dear late father, Bill Sr.?" "Oh, yes," Borgel said. "I used to spend whole summers here." "I wish you had given me some advance notice that you were coming," Gypsy Bill Jr. said. "I could have cleared the chickens out of the presidential suite." "That would have been nice," Borgel said. "Perhaps we'll come out this way again." "If you do, make sure to wire ahead. Then you won't have to sleep in your car. We can have the presidential suite hosed out and freshened up on a day's notice. Is that cornmeal mush with Mexican peppers you're eating?" "My specialty," Borgel said. "Would you care for some? There's more than enough." "Thank you," Bill Jr. said. "Running a first-class resort and duck farm gives me an appetite like an ox." Gypsy Bill Jr. spoke the truth. He not only ate as much as an ox might have eaten, he also made the same sort of noises. "If you like, I'll be pleased to read your fortunes in the tea leaves," Gypsy Bill Jr. said. "No charge, of course, just a free reading for my guests." "So you are carrying on the psychic work of your esteemed father," Borgel said. "I, for one, would be very interested to have you read our fortunes, especially for free. The tea leaves are wild blueberry and mint. Will that make a difference?" "Not in the slightest, my dear sir," Gypsy Bill Jr. said. "Just pour what's left of the tea in my hat." Bill Jr. removed the uppermost of his hats and held it out, upside down. Borgel dumped the contents of his portable aluminum kettle into the hat. "We'll just shake it up to get the wet out," Gypsy Bill Jr. said, and flipped his hat up and down. All the time, cold blueberry and mint tea was dripping through the crown of the hat onto Gypsy Bill Jr.'s shoes. "Okay, that's about right. Now read 'em," he said. "Watch this," Borgel whispered. "I've seen his father do this. If he's half as good, it will be a treat." Gypsy Bill Jr. gave a shrill hoot and leaped 3 or 4 feet straight into the air. Continuing to hoot, he rolled around on the ground, thrashing and kicking his feet. All this time, he was twisting and pounding on the hat full of soggy tea leaves. Then he sat up and began bouncing around on his bottom, covering a good bit of territory. He struggled to his feet, staggered, as if he were hurt, clutching the dripping hat to his stomach, and then began to hop up and down until he was exhausted. Then he collapsed onto the ground, panting. He was drenched with sweat and tea. Gypsy Bill Jr. on the ground laid there for some time, getting his breath back. Finally, he sat up, pulled the hat open, and looked inside. "Hoo boy," he shouted. "You fellas have got some future." Chapter 15. It turned out that Gypsy Bill Jr. charged nothing to read a fortune, but if you wanted to find out what he had read, it would cost you $20. Uncle Borgel turned down the offer. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's a matter of principle with me. I never pay to have my fortune told." Gypsy Bill walked away, dripping and mumbling. Uncle Borgel whispered, "Confidentially, I'd have paid him $20 not to tell us our fortunes." "Can he really do it?" Fafner asked. "I suppose so. His father could do it every time." "If you think he's really able to tell what's going to happen, wouldn't it be useful to know in advance?" I asked. "It would be a great big bore to know in advance," Uncle Borgel said. "I know what I'm talking about. If you know what's going to happen in advance, there would be no surprises, hence no fun." "Speaking of what's going to happen," I said, "are we going to keep traveling, or have we settled down at Gypsy Bill's Resort and Spa and Junkyard and Duck Farm?" "Good point," Uncle Borgel said. "We've had our breakfast, and we've had our fortunes read, but not told. Now, let's get packed up and on the road before this beautiful day is wasted. Where'd the dog go?" I put 2 fingers in my mouth and whistled the way Borgel did. Fafner appeared from behind the presidential suite and bounded into the car. Borgel was busy packing up the portable kitchen when Gypsy Bill Jr. appeared again. This time he was leading his goat. "You wouldn't be headed out Bugleville way, would you? Bill Jr. asked. Might be, Borgel said. You wouldn't mind taking a rider along? Gypsy Bill asked. I know someone who might be going in that direction. It isn't the goat, is it? Borgel asked. No, it's a human, far as I can tell. In that case, sure, Uncle Borgel said. I wouldn't mind taking the goat, but we've got a dog with us, and they might get to fighting. That's really nice of you, Gypsy Bill Jr. said. How about $10 and I'll only tell your futures through next Thursday? No deal, Borgel said. Well, no hard feelings, Bill Jr. said. By the way, I never did catch your name. What is it? General Venustiano Carranza, Borgel said. Of course, Gypsy Bill said. I didn't recognize you without your whiskers. I'll go get your passenger. Hurry it up, Borgel said. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Then he said to me, as Bill Jr. went to get our rider, never give your right name on the road. Chapter 16. The passenger Gypsy Bill Jr. brought us was a man even shorter than Uncle Borgel. His head was bald, and he had a bushy white beard that reached past his knees, which is to say, almost to the ground. He wore a sort of shirt that came all the way down to the tops of his boots, which were big yellow ones with thick soles. He had a knapsack and a sign. The sign was a piece of cardboard with the word "Kapop" painted on it. This was the conversation that passed between Borgel and our passenger. Nav schmaz kapop, the little man said. Kapka posto Bugleville, Borgel said. Kapop, the little man repeated. Popso naka, Borgel said. Popka schmaz navka, nav schmaz kapop, said the little man. Papusko naba kapapak, Borgel said. Hee hee hee, said the little fellow. He jumped up and down, evidently very happy. The bearded guy clambered into the back seat of the Dorble's Edge. Fafner appeared to like him. At least, he didn't snarl. What were you talking about with him? I whispered to Borgel. I have no idea, Borgel whispered back. I was just trying to be polite. I have a gift for languages, but I never know what they mean. I think he was talking French. That's not French, I said. You may be right, Borgel said. Anyway, he seemed like a nice fellow. Maybe he'll tell an amusing story on the way. Borgel was right. At least the strange man chattered away from the moment the Dorbzelge started rolling. He was evidently convinced that Borgel could understand what he was saying. Borgel encouraged him in this belief by answering him in his own strange language. Kapopski napsi hadataka the kapush, the stranger said. As we pulled out of Gypsy Bill's resort spa and junkyard and duck farm, waving to Gypsy Bill Jr. and his goat. Poopsie napsi kabash kabash nutzel, Borgel said. It must have been just the right thing, because the stranger immediately answered, Oh, napsi vut vabash subu fui. Borgel nodded his head and said, Difko fui navut. At this point, the stranger laughed quite a bit, shaking his head and repeating, Vutna, 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 hiya. Do you have any idea what you two are talking about? I asked Borgel. I believe I'm starting to pick up the language, Borgel said. I honestly don't know how I do it. As far as I can tell, this man used to be either the advisor of a great king, or millionaire, or president, something like that. Or possibly a tailor, a bookie, or a kosher butcher. In any case, he's out of a job now. Also, he's interested in stopping at any zoos we may happen to pass. He's never seen a penguin, and it's bothering him. You were able to understand all that? I'm not sure, of course, Borgel said. He may also have been telling us that he has a very contagious disease. I'll try to talk with him some more. Papush chaza inbudnovsky, he said to the little man. Klabash, tavutka hadadada kapap, the little man said. Then he said, Also, if you see one of those root beer places, please stop. I'd like to buy you all a drink. You speak English? I shouted. So do you, the little man shouted back. You never said you spoke English, I said. How do you know? The bearded fellow said. So how did I do speaking your language? Borgel asked. Not bad, the little man said. You said you were a politically corrupt sardine and you wanted to eat the tires off motorcycles. Really? I said that? Like a native. I don't know how I do it, Borgel said. So how about stopping for a root beer? The little man said. No, Fafner and I shouted. I could use one, Borgel said. We'll be on the lookout for one of those places with the orange sign. Please, not root beer, I begged. Those are the ones, the stranger said. They serve it in a frosty mug. Yummy, Borgel said. Oh, God, no, Fafner said. So who are you anyway? Borgel asked our little passenger. Chapter 17. I am Pack Nufbumnum, the little man said. Huh? Exactly. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, Borgel said. I am Dr. Wiley Sinclair. This is my great-grandnephew, Colonel Sebastian Moran, and our dog, Shep. Fafner and I nodded formally to Pap Nufbumnum. I am deeply honored, Pack Nufbumnum said. No more so than ourselves, Borgel said. You appear to be a person of distinction. If you have no objection, I might ask the nature of your journey. Certainly, Packnef replied. For the most part, I travel for pleasure and to gain knowledge of the various times and places I encounter. I also enjoy sending postcards and souvenirs of my travels to my friends and relations at home. I'm a native of Benton Harbor, Michigan, where my family has been engaged in the tapioca industry for many generations. Who has not heard of Nuflum's tapioca? Borgel said. And you say you travel for pleasure. How long have you been away from home? This time, some over 80 years, Pack Nufbum said. I'm a habitual traveler in time, space, and the other. You might say I'm some sort of professional tourist. The same as myself, Borgel shouted. I knew it, Pack Nufbum said. I could tell at once that you and I had fallen in with a good crowd. Let's be friends. You may call me Freddie. With pleasure, Borgel said. And I will call you Borgel, Melvin, and Fafner. I believe those were the names by which you address one another. We may as well abandon formality since we're all adventurers together. Put her there, Freddie, Borgel said, reaching over the seat back and shaking hands with the little time tourist. Were you on your way anywhere in particular? Freddie asked. We were considering heading for the big city, Borgel said. His voice became confidential. I am the principal stockholder in a fine squashed skunk, and I thought I might as well take it where I can get the highest price. Congratulations, Freddie said. But if I might venture a word of advice, the squashed skunk market is depressed at the moment. You might do well to wait a while and sell your skunk at the Great Fair and Market, which begins in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, if I might make a further suggestion, could you be persuaded to consider taking a little detour? I can always be persuaded to take a little detour, Borgel said. What did you have in mind? Have you any particular interest in popsicles? I can't say that I have, Borgel said. I have, Fafner said. Well, I have always been strongly interested in popsicles of all sorts, Freddie said. I'm not referring only to well-known trademark popsicles manufactured by the Popsicle Company, a firm almost as old as well-respected Nufbum's tapioca, but to the generic popsicle. I'm meaning any sort of frozen water-based confection on a stick, an ice pop. In other words, or a quintessentially frozen dessert stick. Also Italian ices, fudgesicles, and ice cubes with toothpicks in them, made of everything from raspberry soda to chicken soup. Fascinating, Fafner said. Probably my personal all-time favorite is the root beer popsicle, Freddie said. Yuck, yuck, Fafner and I said. So you like popsicles. What about it? Borgel asked. When you like popsicles as much as I do, it's natural to be interested in them, Freddie said. It shouldn't surprise you that I've traveled millions of miles and thousands of light years in pursuit of rare and exotic popsicles. Doesn't surprise me a bit, Fafner said. This was almost the first time I'd ever seen Fafner take much interest in what anyone was saying. I don't wish to brag, but it's a certainty that I have tasted more different varieties of popsicles and their cognates than any being who is alive or ever was alive. What is more, I have the honor of being a commander of the Ancient Order of Popsicle Lovers, and 5 years ago received a special gold medal for my many contributions to the field. I have it here. Freddie showed us a gold medal in the shape of a popsicle. I am also the author of a book, Popsikellen, Geist und Wissenschaft, which I wrote in German to show that it was really serious. It runs more than 900 pages and is considered the last word on the subject. Wow, I said. I felt that I ought to say something. And of course, there have been many contributions to scholarly journals dealing with popsicles and frozen desserts in general. And my humble contribution to the artistic side of the field, the banana popsicle. You invented that? Fafner said with real admiration. Someone else would have if I hadn't, Freddie said modestly. It's always like that when an idea's time has come. So you're telling us, Borgel said, is that you are the greatest expert alive on the subject of popsicles? In a word, yes, Freddie said. And why are you telling us this? Borgel asked. Well, first of all, to show off, Freddie said, but also to prepare you for what I am about to tell you. What would you say if I told you there was one ultimate popsicle, a popsicle above all others, a sort of supreme popsicle beside which all other popsicles melt into nothingness? Hey, are you still awake? If you are, thanks for listening. That concludes chapters 4 through 17 of Borgel by Daniel Pinkwater. I hope you'll join me tomorrow for the rest. Have a great night. Don't forget to like and subscribe.